I can't believe you just told me that right before we
I know.
hit record.
Don't tell anyone.
Well, now I kind of have to.
I told you that in strict confidence.
Yeah, you were very confident in your telling me that. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I think the charges are going to be dropped, but you know, it depends on the judge.
Man.
So, we'll see.
It's just a shame to see Shaggy stoop so low.
Okay, now you've lost me. Are we talking about Scooby-Doo Shaggy or like R&B artist Shaggy?
I thought they were the same person this entire time.
No, well, no, because Scooby-Doo Shaggy, I believe, is Casey Kasem.
Or Matthew Lillard.
Or Matthew Lillard. I forgot about those ones. Those were, I actually really liked those.
I did too. I
especially love that they made Scrappy-Doo the villain, because I always hated Scrappy-Doo.
Yeah, that was a good call. Nice twist.
Yeah.
Anyway, you didn't actually tell me anything. I just wanted to put you on the spot and see you squirm.
No, I mean, I did tell you something though. Something very exciting.
Yeah. You're pregnant.
We have goats. I have kids. I have kids. Actually, no, my dad just had kids. So my family, my dad has like an acre of land in the Thurston area of Springfield, which is, Thurston. It's where Camron and I went to high school. And he's got like we had an ice storm in January that just knocked down a bunch of limbs. There's like blackberries and just there's a lot of brush on his property. So and my dad grew up raising cattle, and my entire life swore he would never have livestock again. In fact, when I think at some point when I was in high school, he had chickens that his partner had purchased, and he absolutely hated the chickens.
Oh man, I would love chickens.
I rented a house a couple years ago that had 4 chickens. It was amazing. Fresh eggs every day. And if you haven't had like actual farm fresh eggs,
they are so different.
So much better. So much richer. The color is better.
Have you had duck eggs?
Yes. Yeah.
They're even better.
I love duck eggs. They're first of all, they're bigger.
Yeah.
And I feel like the ratio of yolk to white is more than in like a chicken egg. Color is amazing. It's not that like pale, sickly yellow that like store-bought chicken eggs are. But there's somebody at the Corvallis Farmers Market that sells duck eggs, and I buy from them pretty frequently.
I've got a coworker who's got chickens and ducks, and she'll sell... Sorry, I got something caught in my throat. But she'll sell them for like $6 a dozen. And so we've got some coworkers.
That's actually a pretty high price. I think the ones I buy, they're like somewhere between $3 and $6 for the dozen. They might be
$4. I don't know, because she also does chicken eggs. I just know that I saw we learned about it, that she sold them in a training that all of us team leads had to go to. Mm-hmm. And then we had like a morning check-in with the team leads the first day of school. And because one of them had agreed to buy some eggs from her. She's like, all right, it's, $4, whatever. And he shows up with like a $20 bill, and he goes, keep them coming. Let me know when that runs out.
Yeah. Hey, I mean,
he's got a farm egg tab that he's opened.
There are worse tabs to have.
Yeah, I guess it's true.
But yeah, so I'm gonna pull it up on my phone.
Yeah, let's see these goats.
So happy 420.
What?
It's 420.
It's 7:20 where I am.
It's 4:21 now.
I still had students in my room at 4:20 where I live.
Smoking weed.
Yeah.
Smoking weed with the Mormon teacher.
You know how it goes.
Yeah. Anyways, so here I don't know if you can.
I can
necessarily see them. So this I'm gonna try to get it to focus. So the black one up front, that's Angus.
Okay.
named after, and I think he's the half brother of the two back there. But my dad grew up raising Angus cattle,
Sure.
which are all black. And when I was a kid, I had this toy goat that I thought looked like a baby cow, a calf. So I would always call it a cow. And so he decided, because Angus is also all black and looks like a black version of that toy, my dad decided to name it Angus. And then his
Aww.
two sisters in the back are Thelma and Louise, but I think those names may be changing.
If he keeps those names and those goats end up causing him trouble, it is his own fault.
Well, so he's we've thrown around a few names. I at first we were going to get all males. And I was throwing around the name William, which is, of course, the name of William Kidd,
Sure.
the famous Captain Kidd.
Yeah. That's a pun. That's a pun
yeah.
there.
And then also William H. Bonney, better known as Billy the Kid. So, but I'm not sure what we're going to be naming. We might be naming them after. My sister suggested Simone, and then one of the other women on the U.S. Olympic gymnastics team, because they are the goats.
I think you should name one Mr. T, because then it would be your goat T.
I mean, Angus is the only boy, so he's already got
He's already got his name. Darn.
Yeah.
Mrs.
Yeah.
T then.
I am campaigning to name one. If we're going to name one Simone after Simone Biles, I'm campaigning to name the other one Jade after Jade Carey, who is one of the women on the U.S. gymnastics team, who's also a student at OSU, and the team won gold like 2 days ago for the overall team portion of it. Now I think they're doing individuals, but yeah, OSU has a great gymnastics program.
Interesting. Well, let me know what you end up calling them.
Yeah.
Speaking of goats, there's no segue here. Let's talk about people who are definitely not the goats. The current status of the election. That's what this whole episode is about. We're going to cover some of the stuff that we didn't get to in the last episode, and then kind of where are we at. And before we do that, I want to issue an apology, because I thought I had been hitting the publish button for the podcast episodes for the last 2 or 3 episodes. And then my cousin Harrison's like, how come there's nothing published? I thought you said you just put one up. And I was like, I did. And then I went on, and they're sitting in the drafts on Spotify where we upload and host.
It was on YouTube, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I'd been uploading them to YouTube just fine. The problem was, here's what happens, is on YouTube, you can get everything set and hit upload, and then, or hit publish, and it will continue to upload the video in the background, and then we'll just publish it once it's done uploading and processing. Right. Spotify, you have to wait for it to upload and then click publish. And that's where I was getting the mistake, because what I've been doing is I'll start it on Spotify, then I'll start uploading it to YouTube, because we want to do video on YouTube. We don't want to do just the audio, whereas Spotify will only transfer the audio over. So,
well, not always. I've noticed a couple, and I'm not sure what it is that you're doing or if it was intentional, but there have been a couple episodes that we've published where the video is also on Spotify, which I didn't even know.
So that is a recent feature that they added to different things. So now you can upload video podcasts to Spotify, but it doesn't distribute the video. It only distributes the audio.
I have no idea what that means.
Meaning, so when we host our podcast on Spotify, it distributes it out to all of the other platforms.
Oh, to Audible, Apple Podcasts.
Exactly, yes. And I don't know about all the platforms, but I know that it will distribute to YouTube automatically, but it doesn't distribute the video. It only distributes the audio. And so
Right,
when you
so
look,
do you
when you look
upload
at,
it separately to YouTube?
yes. And so
Okay.
when you look at our YouTube, it has each episode posted twice. One is audio only, one is video and audio. And
Okay.
so I manually upload the video ones. That way people can see it. But
Yeah, otherwise why would we?
right. And so
Have
I've
video.
just been sitting there and being like, okay, they're both ready to go. I'll just leave it and come back and check on it, make sure it's okay. And it hasn't been okay. So
And then Harrison, you get a text from Harrison a couple days later, which shout out to Harrison. I think you're now our number one fan.
right. Yeah. My wife isn't even our number one fan.
I know. Yeah. I think my parents have listened to a couple episodes. My boss listens pretty frequently.
Well, hey.
But then she usually just texts me like, why didn't you say this? Or just criticisms, which I appreciate, Lisa.
Yeah, that's what Harrison texts me. Harrison and my friend Brian.
Yeah. I frequently have to remind people that like I understand that you're frustrated that we didn't get to this topic or, that topic. We have a time limit.
Not only that, but it's one thing to be listening to the podcast and saying, oh, but they're not mentioning this, they're not bringing this up. And it's another to be sitting in the heat of the moment trying to be like, okay, he is saying this, which means I can bring up these couple of things. You look at any debate and people are never going to bring up and cover every single thing.
Right.
Right. And so, we do our best, but
yeah, I mean,
we're
I feel
human.
like
We miss stuff.
You and I come in, I think, with like one or two points that, we want to touch on. Excuse me. But we don't have like a script or anything. And this
you don't have a script?
No. Oh,
what?
Sorry.
Then what is this thing that I've been reading off of?
Yes, I have a script. Of course I don't have a script. Cameron owes you $100. What? Who put that in there? That's weird. I mean, it's in the script. I don't know. You can just Venmo me, I guess.
No. All right. Well, let's actually get back to talking about politics. Oh my gosh, I'm moving stuff around. Let's talk about the politics of it. Finally,
yes, because we're on a short timeline because I have a slip disc from moving. I don't know if you guys can see this, but all those bags are 150 pounds, and apparently, if you don't lift them correctly, you can really do some damage to yourself.
Yeah, that's why we say don't lift with your back, which it sounds like is exactly what you did.
No, I mean I'm super careful about that. I gotta make sure that this focuses again.
You're good.
Am I?
Yeah, you're fine.
Well, I'm super careful about that. I mean I have like a electric hoist up on the ceiling. You can't see it, but normally I'm just like sliding them. And I know to, lift with my legs. And if I do lift with my back, bend at the waist, don't bend at the back. I think I just twisted weird. And obviously I think this has like been a compounding kind of injury over several years. But yeah, it's given me a lot of trouble. So sitting is actually incredibly painful.
Speaking of compounding injuries over several years, President Biden dropped out. So we know that Biden dropping out of the election is old news at this point.
Yes.
Happened a couple weeks ago. But I think there are some interesting implications that conversations we've had about what that means moving forward. And then, we're recording this before the Democratic National Convention, and so they haven't officially chosen a candidate, but there is a pretty clear front runner.
Yeah.
Probably going to be.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons.
I can't imagine anyone else getting the nomination.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's start with Biden dropping out. First of all, I saw it coming a mile away.
I was surprised. Here's the important thing. I think the most valuable skill that somebody could have when they're, especially, when they're digesting the political situation, is the ability to take in new facts and change your opinion.
Yeah.
So I definitely, I'm not gonna, deny, like 2 days before Biden drops out, you and I were texting back and forth, and I was like, "There's no way."
Yeah, I was like, "Hey, there's a rumor
Because
that he's going to drop out in the next day or two," and you're like, "No."
I was like, it's just propaganda. Like, but the reason why I was saying that is because that is the narrative that the entire Biden campaign was pushing, and in fact, I've heard anecdotes that even people very, very high up in his like campaign staff found out minutes before he posted it on social media.
I mean, I think with something like this, you have to play it pretty close to the chest, because if you come out and say, "I'm thinking of not running," it's just going to come off as weak. You're going to lose relationships internationally. You're going to lose relationships with your own party. You're going to disenfranchise a whole group of voters. But if you come out and say, "No, I'm in it until the end," until you're not, then, I think it's better long-term for him and the party to have done it the way he did it. I think that on the flip side, you have all these now Republicans and moderates who are like, "This dude clearly isn't going to make it," who are now like vindicated and who are saying,
but
now they're saying, "Look, the media was telling us he was fine for all these years, and now they're saying he wasn't fine. So now who do we trust, or what do we trust?"
No, see, I actually think it's kind of the opposite. I think so there's a couple things to consider. One is that Biden had a case of COVID, which I think ended up being worse than was reported in the media.
I do think that was the linchpin. I think that was the final straw.
I think so too. But even now, he maintains that he believes that he would be able to do it, and he didn't want to drop out, but it became a matter of what is best serving the country, and so he dropped out. And I think the narrative that whether I'm not going to deny that there's any merit to it, but the media really, really kind of did him dirty because they kept pushing that old narrative, the Biden's super old, which he is. That's definitely a concern. I think he's still mentally capable. I think that he, unless there was a significant, illness like dementia or something that popped up, in a second term, that would be concerning. But I think as he is right now, he's a little slow. He's not the spring chicken that he was in the 2008 election, but I think he's still capable, and certainly much more capable than Trump.
See, I'm going to disagree. I think what happens with almost every old person out there is you get to a point where you have a mixture of good days and bad days. Elderly people are not a straight line. I'm like this every single day. Some days they're better, some days they're worse. And eventually it gets to the point where you have more bad days than good. I think Biden is at that point where he's teetering. Maybe it's 50-50. Maybe he's got 60% good days. I don't know. But I feel like the number of bad days, tough days he's having is getting to the point where it's problematic for his campaign, problematic for his presidency. And I think Trump, when I look at the energy level of the two, I think Trump still has significantly more good days when it comes to his physical capabilities, his energy levels.
Yes. So, okay, I would actually agree with that. I think that Biden's decline is much more of a physical decline in his ability, which is more visible and is more creates more like of a show. I think Trump's decline is mental, and I would much rather have if we were going to have an aging president, I'd rather the decline be physical and not mental. But that's also, I feel like, giving Trump too much credit that there was a mental ability there from which he could decline.
Oh, and you're gonna say that Biden, who can't keep his own life stories straight across multiple campaign events in consecutive days, is gonna be even better?
I think
look,
he gets
I'm not
stories mixed up, but I think when
it's not just getting stories mixed up, it's making up stuff like his brother was eaten by cannibals. Or his uncle, or whoever.
I still don't know what that one was about, so I'm not gonna defend him, but I'm also not gonna buy into it because I honestly have no idea what that's
the problem, though, right? Is, we look at people like we look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump clearly has issues with speaking a coherent, straight sentence a lot of the time,
and a truthful sentence.
But so does Biden,
and also not just immediately going off on a tirade.
Okay, but a lot of politicians do that. I'm not saying that's excusing the behavior.
Not to that extent.
I think
a lot of politicians do it, but man, he's Nancy the goat.
Pelosi does it. Nancy Pelosi does the same thing all the time. Yeah, especially in her old age, she's definitely becoming the get off my lawn old person. 100%.
Yeah, that maybe that's not me agreeing. I'm saying I'm not gonna. Yeah,
we'll neither confirm
I can see
nor
where
deny.
you're coming from. I can see where you're coming from. I don't necessarily agree with that. But.
Now, bringing it back to the whole Biden thing, though, I think ultimately him stepping down from the campaign is a significantly better chance for the Democrats to win.
I think so too. I was concerned because honestly, I think that, I mean, let's just jump right into it. Obviously Kamala Harris is the presumptive nominee now, and I don't know that much about her. I know some of the stuff that she did as the DA for San Francisco. I know some of the stuff that she did as the attorney general for California. But I honestly, I think that is, I couldn't name you a single thing that she championed as vice president. Now,
isn't that a problem though?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think yeah, okay. I think that is now her biggest problem, but that's also considering that now all of the people saying, I don't want to have to vote for an old white man. Now the wind has totally been taken out of their sails. She's not only is she a perfect candidate to appeal to the rule of law people as a fairly, I wouldn't say unsympathetic, but she was a bulldog as a prosecutor. And I have some issues with, some of the stuff that she prosecuted, particularly, people with marijuana charges. But she's well-spoken. She's a woman of color. She is young in terms of typical presidential candidates. And I think, she raised $81 million for the campaign, and also, inherited all of Biden's assets.
I got
$81 million in the first day.
I got some major problems with that.
But my point is that the Democratic electorate is now excited, and I don't
know that they are.
I think they are. They are.
Here's the thing: we don't know where a lot of that money came from, and so there's
we do.
There's a lot of hints.
Also, if you're going to play that game, where the hell is Trump's money coming from? More importantly, where is his money going? Which it's going to his legal fees. But
I'm not going to deny any of that. It's not like I'm sitting here saying Trump's a saint with his campaign funds or anything. I'm not going to.
But if you're saying there's something nefarious about the $81 million, there isn't.
She got less than 800 votes in her initial primary campaign, yes, there is something wrong with that.
She's bad at campaigning, but
so someone who's bad at campaigning just campaigned for a day and got $81 million?
Because first of all, she got all of the people that voted or that were going to vote for Biden. That was still a significant chunk of people. The Trump Biden race was still pretty close. So she got all of those people, and also a lot of people that were on the fence, and inherited Biden's like campaign team and everything. And I can tell you this, for a fact, there are a lot of first time donators within the Democratic electorate, including myself, including members of my family who have never donated money to a presidential campaign before, and did it for the first time because this election is super important no matter what side you're on. I think everyone agrees there's the stakes are somewhat existential.
I don't think it is, but I'll get to that later.
I think a lot of people do think that, though.
I don't deny
on
that.
both sides.
I think people think this election is important. I don't. Here's the thing. I look at how many elections have we had in our lifetime, and how many of those have been labeled the most important election of our lifetime. Almost every single one I can remember has been. And if you go back and look throughout history, people said the same thing about, Reagan versus Carter. They said the same thing about Nixon's campaign years. They said the same thing about FDR and Truman and Teddy Roosevelt. Like, if every campaign is the most important campaign, or if every election is the most important election so far, are they really?
Well, yeah, I mean, they like from a theoretical standpoint, yeah, they can be, because all they have to do is be more important than the previous most important one. But also, there's so much about this campaign cycle that is unprecedented. And I know that unprecedented is a word that's being used a lot, but I don't necessarily think that it's being overused.
I think that there is more precedent than people think. Go ahead and finish, though.
I do too, but I also think that it's not just the way things are happening. I think it's the way that it will affect how things happen in the future.
I think there's a lot more.
That makes it that important.
Well, I can see that. I can see that. Now, the reason I think there's a lot more precedent is, I'm just going to make some assumptions here. You tell me if I'm wrong. A lot of what I'm seeing, the reason behind people saying that this is an unprecedented or a super important election, has to do with a lot of potential nationalism and authoritarianism.
Yes, and the remarks that Trump continues to make about how, like at that Christian convention thing, where I'm not taking it out of context. I watched the full thing. He did say, "Vote for me, and you won't have to vote again." Now, I understand he probably meant vote for me this election, and then I'm not going to be asking you to vote for me again, because he would step down. But the words that he said, and in the absence of any context clues to point to otherwise, were vote for me this election, and then you never have to vote again.
So, I mean, I can see why that's a bad choice of words, but the reason I think this isn't that big of a deal is I look back at the progressive movement of the early 1900s, specifically Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, right? People who openly pushed for a huge centralization of the economy, pushed for a huge centralization of power towards the federal government, all of which are things that President Trump is the opposite of. Then I look at things like you want to bring up the whole idea of
wait, hold on. No, I don't think that he's the opposite of. I think that he wants to centralize it, but in a much different way, where it's distilled down to an even smaller amount of people.
So, but that's the key difference, right? Because that's not fascism or nationalism, that's oligarchy. And that's equally bad in its own ways. Yeah. I'm not going to say that that's good, but if we're going to use these labels, we need to use the correct labels, right?
Sure. And then, no, I'll agree with that distinction. Again, oligarchy is not mutually exclusive to fascism, and B, it's not.
Yeah, but fascism is built on part of the main ideas of fascism is a centralized economy on the government, like a government centralized economy. And an oligarchy, by definition,
centralized economy that is specifically controlled by corporations and profit-driven entities that are
It doesn't have to be. So if you look at let's look
but
at the
historically
fascist
that
No,
is
it's not.
very
No, it's not. You look at the fascist dictatorships that have come up in the past, and it's been state-run industries. I mean, Volkswagen, for example, was the product of a Nazi-controlled or a Nazi party attempt to create a centralized auto industry, right?
yes
You look at, and then you compare that to, let's say, the communist Russia, Soviet Union, where it was very much an oligarchical dictatorship, right? The only people who got into power were the rich people who had friends,
right,
and
which is why Russian cars are famously terrible,
right. But those are the people who said, "Hey, I already have a car company. Let's make this one the centralized." That's the same product, but very different.
Right, but I think the difference in communism and why it made like worse products, like especially in the auto industry, is because the way that the oligarchy utilized the communist system, that's different than, you know, a fascist system, is that communism removes the like financial incentive to improve.
Yes, that's exactly right.
For the individual, for the people that are not in power, for the proletariat.
Well, for everyone across the board, really. But
except for the people in the oligarchy.
Well, no, because even the people in the oligarchy are going to say, "Hey, my cars are the only options you have, so why do I need to make them better?"
Right, but they also get the profit for that.
Bringing it back, we're getting distracted. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Bringing it back, the whole point I was trying to make is I don't think this is unprecedented. I don't think this is the biggest election in our history, because I look at FDR being elected 4 times, right? And pretty quick after that, we drafted a bill to make it to where that's not possible again, because we were like, hey, you know, we had some stuff with FDR that was great, but we also don't like the fact that we basically had a single ruler for 4 years.
Right. Yeah.
And then if we look at stuff like
George Washington willingly stepped down and set that precedent.
Exactly, for that exact reason.
That everyone just kind of I mean, I think even Alexander Hamilton advocated for like essentially a monarchy.
Kind of.
And he really wanted like a very centralized bank and stuff.
Yeah, he was a big federalist.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that's a big reason why he butted heads with Jefferson. But and Madison.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I agree.
Yeah. That being said, another thing I wanted to touch on was another thing that people are saying this is unprecedented is because of racist remarks. Man, I'm not going to lie. Trump's
unprecedented.
No, I mean,
that's
LBJ
happened our entire history.
Well, do you know what LBJ, who signed the Civil Rights Act, do you know what he called it?
Oh, I'm certain it was awful.
I can't say what he called it, so I will use the letter, right? He called it the N bill with a hard R.
Yeah.
Right? That's what he called it. So for me, like, thinking of, hey, this is the guy who passed Civil Rights Acts, the Civil Rights Act. Comparing that to where we currently are, I just don't see the comparison. When people say this is the biggest election, they say this is the most important one that we've had in a long time. Like, I just disagree. And part of that is partially because I think things were worse in the past, and I do genuinely think they are better today. And part of that is because I look at the results of so many different elections, and at the end of the day, the world just keeps turning, things move forward, people get over it, people move on. And that doesn't negate the bad things that they go through in the moment. But I mean, if to use an analogy, we look at the stock market that has ups and downs and ups and downs. But the longer you zoom out, the longer you look at it, the more you zoom out, it's always an upward trend. And I see the same thing with our political history. The more you zoom out, sure, we're going to have dips and climbs, but we're on an upward trend.
So that's an interesting example to use, because it actually relates a lot to coffee roasting. With coffee roasting and your like temperature profile, you want a steady increase in temperature but you want the rate of that increase to be steadily declining. So essentially the derivative,
You want a curve.
yeah, well, yeah, you want the graph of your rate of rise to be going down while your rise is going up steadily.
Yeah, it's a sideways
And
parabola. It's going to go up faster and then slowly taper off the slope.
Yeah, skewed very heavily to one side.
Yeah.
And if you have any sharp increases, you're going to have issues. If you have any sharp decreases, you're going to have issues. And that is somewhat analogous to, I think, what you were describing. But what I'm afraid of, and why I think that this election itself is so important, is, in the late aughts, early teens, we started to see this shift. I think more so in the right, a shift in the conservative field that has led us to even the possibility that Trump would get elected. Because he was running for president back then. He still had the same, name recognition. I think he actually had more of a grasp on the issues and just reality itself back then. What I see this election as is a decision point for the American electorate of the direction that we're going to go as a country. And I could very easily see a second Trump term being the start of, the fall of the Roman Empire.
Oh, please. I think that start happened a long, long time ago, if we're being honest.
Well, yeah,
I would say Vietnam.
I could, well, no. Cause then you have the 80s, you have this big, financial boom. You have the tech revolution of the 90s. I don't see things that would be that impactful happening within the next 20 years. Now, obviously, if I did see what was coming, I'd be investing in making myself a lot of money. But I don't know. I mean, AI may be one of those things. But I think that if Trump is elected, the elections that happen, assuming that they happen, that happen after that will be another step on a steady decline that will eventually end in either the collapse of, the American nation, or a restructuring of America.
I agree, but not for the reasons that you might think. I don't think it's a problem inherent with Trump. I think it's a problem inherent just with American politics in general. You go back to the Citizens United case.
I agree.
Where we allow corporations and companies to start having this huge voice in politics.
I thank you for bringing that up. I'm gonna say the start of that decline, if it does happen, was the Citizens United case. I think that doomed us to a much more contentious and unnecessarily vicious election cycle that also has served to discount the actual impact of voting.
I agree. And I think it's because what happens is it opens up the doors to a lot more lobbying. It opens up the doors to a lot more, hey, if you do what I want, I'll give you enough money to get reelected,
Yeah.
And so
money
I
talks,
think that's
bullshit walks.
I need that on a t-shirt.
Look, I will print that on a t-shirt for you.
Oh man, or a mug.
If you promise to wear that, I don't know, probably not to school, because you probably couldn't do that.
I couldn't do that.
Maybe like a family get together. I would pay you money to take a picture at like a family reunion wearing that shirt.
I tell you, I mean, I would probably get some weird looks at first, but then they'd get over it. My family swears more than I think you think they do.
Oh no, I know.
But
I
anyway,
wouldn't wear that shirt at a family get together.
I have a couple uncles who would be like, nice. Um,
Yeah. Where
anyway,
can I get one?
exactly. No, but I think, what was I saying? So we talked about Citizens United. I think another thing about the reason I think that we're kind of in a decline, it's not a symptom of Trump or even Biden. I think it's a symptom of just the overall political parties. How I remember,
Yeah.
love him or
I
hate
think it's
him.
wariness of the system.
Yeah,
And depending on, your values and, you know, geographic location, you lie on one side of, the political spectrum, but I think that everyone is like, this sucks.
I agree. And love him or hate him, when we were in high school, Glenn Beck, of all people,
Guess which one I do.
I, he's not my favorite. I liked some of his stuff in high school when I was a lot
You
more conservative.
loved him, and you are totally underselling your history of Glenn Beck fanboying.
I don't know about fanboying. I had a couple of his books that I liked. Anyway,
Cameron,
I
who are you talking to?
anyway, love him or hate him. One of the things that he mentioned when we were in high school, it was during I want to say Obama's reelection campaign, was he was saying, "Look, politics is a pendulum, and it's swinging left and then it's swinging right, and every time it swings a little further to the left, it also swings a little further to the right, and it's going to get to the point where we're going to have wariness of the system. It's going to get to the point where we have people who nobody wants to vote for except for some of the more radical extremes, but the only people that really are going to pay attention are the radical extremes, so we're just going to breed more radical extremes, and look where we are."
Yeah, I mean, that pendulum thing, and I can't believe that I'm saying this about something Glenn Beck put forth. I think there are kind of two possibilities, and the reason why I'm voting for the person that I'm voting for, which I'm sure you guys can guess, RFK Jr.
Blue, no matter who.
No.
No.
I think that the person that I'm choosing to vote for is the best chance that I can see for us avoiding one of these two scenarios. But what I see with the pendulum analogy is either someone's going to come by and flick it really hard, and it's going to start going haywire, and then it'll eventually settle out again, and you'll get back to normal. Or, which I think might be the more terrifying option, is that somebody stops that pendulum and it doesn't swing anymore. And that's more what I think I'm afraid of if, Trump is being sincere about his rhetoric of, we're not going to have any more elections if you elect me, or being a dictator on day one, or denying the result of an election if he loses. Which I think there's arguments for, against all of those being a possibility.
Yeah.
I absolutely 100% believe that he will deny the election if he loses again.
Probably, but he's not in a position where it's going to make any difference right now. He doesn't have any political power. I think worst case scenario, we see some more riots. Even then, I don't know.
I think January 6th, regardless of whether you think it was just something that got out of hand, and it was blown out of proportion, or if you think that it was a coordinated plot, personally, I think it's somewhere in between those two. That was when they still thought he had the ability to get reelected, to serve a second term. I think that if it happens again and he pulls the same kind of stunts of encouraging but not encouraging, but still encouraging, political violence, we're already seeing a major increase in politically violent speech on social media.
Yeah, but it's social media.
That's speech, though. It's the new Roman Forum.
I will say there's a couple things that I want to bring up, and one of them is very relevant to what you just said about maybe it, something that got out of hand, coordinated effort, kind of the thing. And he specifically said that they were in a position where they still thought he could do something about it. And
Yeah.
I think a big problem here is that a lot of Americans do not understand how our political system works. So I want to take a second, because I would be remiss.
I think Trump is one of them.
I think every president since Calvin Coolidge is one of them. I know. I'll tell you why. Because the way our government system is set up is the president cannot actually do any of these things that the presidents campaign on. Things like policy and laws, taxes, all these things that they want to try and get done. They can
with executive orders.
And that's why I say since Calvin Coolidge, right? Because if you look at, really since Woodrow Wilson, but Calvin Coolidge kind of put a freeze on it. He didn't use very many executive orders at all. But when you look at what presidents have been doing with their executive orders since the early 1900s, it's gotten progressively more and more of a power grab. However, there are still heavy limits on what presidents can do with executive orders. If the president really wants to make I think that's
being dissolved away, though. Look at Supreme Court nominations. It's not. It shouldn't have been prohibited for a president late in his term to nominate a Supreme Court justice. That's well within his power, and yet that rule has been changed. And once that precedent was set, they changed that rule again.
But you also have to remember that precedent and those rules are going to apply to both sides. So if we see Trump being...
They didn't because not only was Amy Coney Barrett nominated much further in the election cycle, I think it was like 80 days before, whereas Obama's was just like within the last year. I think it was like 250 days before. The amount of time that it took to confirm her was much, much shorter.
Sure.
Because I think what we're seeing is a dissolution of the respect for the unspoken rules. Which,
sure, but
that's may or may not be fair, but that's like it's all just kind of always been a series of unspoken agreements that you don't transgress past.
But the thing is, if we really want to make it something that we don't transgress past, then it needs to go from an unspoken to a spoken rule. It needs to be something that is codified. And I don't mind if it gets codified either direction. I'll be honest with you. I don't mind if we say, hey, you have a cutoff day of when you can nominate judges. And I don't mind if we say that cutoff day is the day before you step down.
Yeah.
I don't care which one of those
what we decide needs to be like that precedent. The Supreme Court doesn't actually have the ability to do really anything. It's only because of Marbury versus Madison that they set a precedent, and then we just decided like, oh, okay, that's the Supreme Court's power,
right?
Is to be able to set precedents without actively like changing the Constitution. And now, so if we don't respect those precedents, if we, if they're not precedents, if they're just able to be changed, then it's the Wild West.
But this is all under the supposition, and this is the next thing that I wanted to talk about, that I feel like I would be remiss as a social studies and civics teacher if I didn't bring this up. This is all under the idea that Trump has a Congress that agrees with him, or any president has a Congress that agrees with them. Any president can come on and say, hey, we're going to close the border. But if they don't have a Congress that votes for it, they're not going to have it. They can say we're going to raise or lower taxes. If they don't have a Congress that passes it, it's not going to happen. The president sure has executive orders, but whether those limits are changing or not, there are still a ton of limits on what the president can and cannot do. The president can write a bill, but he can't submit it. He has to get a senator or a House representative to sponsor the bill and submit it for consideration.
But what's the veto ability? Like what's the breakdown of votes needed to veto a presidential executive
They don't
order?
have to. Well, an executive order. That's a great question.
Is it 2/3 or is it 3/4?
Let me double check that.
Or is it a simple majority? I don't think it's a simple majority. And I think where we are right now, no party is going to have more than just a simple majority.
Okay, so here's the answer according to Wikipedia and the Supreme Court. Congress has the power to overturn an executive order by passing legislation that invalidates it, and they can also refuse to provide funding necessary to carry out certain policy measures contained with the order or legitimize policy mechanisms. The Supreme Court,
essentially, it is the same majority that would be needed for just a normal bill, which I believe is 2/3.
No, a normal bill is just a simple majority.
Is it really?
I believe so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess it is because the
a simple majority according to House.gov.
It was just
double checking. Yeah,
Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema that were holding that up. But I think it's gonna stay in gridlock.
Right, but that's the point, right? The Constitution set things up to be arguably very difficult to pass, with the idea that the terrible things won't actually happen, even if a crazy party has the majority. Right.
But it also means that the good things that we want and desperately need to have happen, like, I mean, personally, codifying gay marriage and abortion rights into the Constitution, those aren't going to happen because we don't have the numbers, regardless of the, executive orders or the Supreme Court, we don't have numbers on either side to ensure that kind of thing happens. So I think that it's not necessarily an increase in like bad policies or that we're, doomed.
Sure.
I think really what the danger is a lack of progress that we desperately need.
Yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, it means that it's going to take a lot for a dictatorship to happen in the United States. But on the other hand, there's a reason it took forever to free the slaves. And then Jim Crow, to stop Jim Crow and desegregation.
I mean, even today we're still seeing ramifications.
To stop Jim Crow and make desegregation happen. Sorry, I want to be clear.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I agree with that. I think it'll be a slow burn, but I think Trump becoming the president will get us there quicker and start us on the path to the scenario that I'm concerned about.
I'm still going to disagree for two reasons. One of these is another reason, one other thing that I wanted to bring up a few minutes ago. But two reasons. One is because the right doesn't really have the media on their side, and so the left has the strong advantage of making their policies.
I think that's slowly changing.
I would love to see it change, just for the sake of having more balanced media, or an equal representation of liberal bias versus conservative bias.
I think if you want to have more balanced opinions, then the media on the right needs to actually report facts.
So does the media on the left. And you're telling me Biden's fine. Biden's fine.
I think that the media on the right, first of all, they weren't pushing that Biden was fine. The media was pushing overall, from what I witnessed, was pushing the narrative of two feeble old men. It was Biden that was, and his team, who were insisting that he was fine. And I mean, until I received new information otherwise, I was gonna, take them at their word, which doesn't mean not holding them accountable, but that wasn't my biggest concern with his campaign. I think what we're seeing is the media on the right, as it grows as just an industry, you get more independent news organizations. Like I think Tucker Carlson has started his own
Yeah.
venture after being fired from Fox for lying to their viewers.
Yep.
You see Daily Wire, stuff like that. As those things get bigger, in order for them to compete and be seen as legitimate news by especially people who don't agree with their viewpoints, they have to get better about not appealing to emotions as much as just bare facts. Now, on the other side,
Yeah.
the left side of the media needs to stop playing by their playbook, and which they are increasing that the amount of content that they're creating that also is feeding on emotions rather than facts.
So one thing that
they're doing that because it's very effective. It's a very effective tactic by the right.
One thing that I've noticed is whichever side is not currently in power is the one that's feeding on emotions. And that's oh yeah.
Fear mongering is Fox News 101.
You're kidding
and it has
me.
been
I'm not saying it's not. There's a reason I'd never have liked Fox News.
Yeah.
But
MSNBC,
CNN,
I mean,
MSNBC, they do CNN, just as much. CNN's getting better. They're getting better.
CNN is a little bit different because I think it's specific people. Like, I love Anderson Cooper to death. Some of his stuff, especially like his show, The Full Story on CNN, it's commentary. It's not news.
Right. I look at like Don Lemon. Lots of fear mongering.
But he's not a CNN.
He's not there anymore, but that's because of that, right?
Yeah. But I think like ABC World News, BBC News.
See, but BBC, I notice like I get the same feeling when BBC talks about American politics that I do when I read like a Wikipedia article for something that I'm an expert on, where it's like you're not wrong, but you could be more right on some things. They're like tiny little tweaks that aren't going to change the overall big story, but might add a little bit more nuance and complexity to it.
See, I think it's and there is I can't, for whatever reason I can't think of the news or I know that you're going to disagree with this, but I think NPR actually does a really great job of I think the commentary that they add is in the form of the stories that they choose to cover, but they're not spinning the facts the way that, a lot of these cable news networks are.
I will agree that they're not spinning the facts the same way that the cable news are. I do still think they are biased, and I think that's not because it's a government agency. I think that's just because of the kind of person that an art writing kind of career attracts. That, typically more artsy, more writing heavy.
No, they're not art. They're journalists.
Which is an art. No. So when I say art, I don't mean like painting and sculpting. I mean like the humanities, the human. You're right. Social studies, the liberal arts.
Yeah, but they're also reporting on facts and figures and things like Reuters and Politico. Those are fact based. They specifically decant or distill it down away from any emotional appeal. I think that the next closest thing to that is something like NPR, which does have bias, but the way that they present their bias and communicate that bias is by the stories that they choose to cover and the stories they don't choose to cover. It's not that they're picking and choosing facts. They're still presenting
I would agree with that.
The facts that are relevant, whether it helps their case, their personal case or not, in a way that, CNN, certainly Fox, MSNBC don't do.
To bring it back, though, just to tie it back a little bit before we get too far down this rabbit hole, I was saying that I think one of the things, one of the main ideas here is that the left has the media on their side a lot of time, which makes it easier for them to pass their policies because, the media can make a policy popular or unpopular based on how they present it. They can take the same fact and make it look good or bad, right? You can say, hey, look, this killed 50 people, or you can say, hey, look, out of 1 million people who tested it, it only killed 50, which,
you can still
spin,
be truthful and
spin
it based on, what do you choose to report?
Yeah. The other side, though, the other thing that I want to bring up, and you are not going to like this, I know you're going to take a big issue with it, is when you look at the total number of political movements that have turned into an authoritarian dictatorship. The movements that are significantly more likely...
It's a non sequitur.
Statistically speaking, the political movements that are much more likely to become authoritarian are leftist.
Is that they call themselves leftist, or that they actually are?
It means
Are they co-opting the left in order to establish a foothold?
So there's
while
a little bit of
also
both.
Being not leftist, like I believe the Khmer Rouge or communist dictators, or the Nazis, who were the National Socialist Party, but really anything but socialist, except for a small group of people, the Aryans.
So here, this is where a lot of politics becomes a little muddled, right? Because we forget, we like to think of politics as a line where you have people on the right,
clear and people on the left. Easy to follow thing.
No, so really a lot of it is oh, okay, I'm so sorry. It's
you're like here's where it gets muddled, and I'm like, because usually it's not.
I'm sorry, I've been dealing with middle schoolers the last 2 days. It's been a rough time.
And what am I if not a middle schooler?
You said it, not me. Anyway.
It's true.
Anyway, no, so a lot of people think that they look at these diagrams of what they think politics is, or because we think of politics as the left versus the right, we think of it as a linear system, when really it's a spectrum. It's more like a color wheel. Or
I think it's engineered to put us in that position in America. When you have a two-party system,
right,
that is the goal. You don't want to entertain these third-party candidates, regardless of whether or not they'd be a better choice or not.
Sure. And I had a professor in college who described the political spectrum more like a horseshoe or a circle, where the further you go to the right, you are also getting closer to the extreme left. And the further you go to the extreme left, the closer you're getting to the extreme right. And they end up sharing a good amount of things. I mean, if you look at the...
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, if you look at the main, like, fascist versus communist dictatorships, they do share a lot of similarities. And so that brings up a lot of people who say, just like you just did, that a lot of these people who are like in the Khmer Rouge or in communist China, maybe not communist China, they're a lot more devoted to the Marxist cause, but maybe Soviet Russia. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say, well, they weren't really Marxists. They were really more people on the right who were adopting the left stances. Or
I would say that they weren't Marxists, but they co-opted not only Marxist ideals, but also practices they co-opt stuff, and then they just spin their narrative to fit whatever is most useful.
I have a lot of reasons for that, and I don't want to dig into a lot of them because I have written papers and papers and papers on this. My personal opinion, based on the history that I've studied, comes down to the idea that the reason that happens is not because they're actually rightist. It's because Marx's utopia, Marx's ideal communism physically is not possible. It cannot be created.
I agree with that.
And so in order to adapt it to reality, they have had to change how it functions. And so some of that ends up being what we think, what is easy to, I would say, mistake for really being a rightist who's co-opting things from the left, is more of, well, we got to figure out how to make this work. And the result ends up two prongs of a horseshoe that are a lot closer to each other, even though they are opposite ends of the horseshoe.
I would agree with that. I think this actually, I think David Pakman. Yeah. So I saw a video of his on YouTube the other day where he was talking to somebody. He said something that you just reminded me of. Like I've said before on this show, I'm a socialist, but I'm not a socialist. I don't. I believe that we should have socialized healthcare. I believe that we should have even things like universal base wage, stuff like that. Things that would be classified socialist. Really, what I am though, and this is what he was saying, is that that and the stuff that like Sweden, Norway, France, countries that we deem socialist, they're not socialist. They're socially democratic.
Well, and they've been moving away from socialism towards a more middle ground capitalist system for
equalize
decades.
out. Yeah. So really, that's what I and I think Bobby Kennedy has said something similar, but on capitalism, we are not capitalist. We are
a mixed economy.
We're a mixed economy that is with capitalist ideals, but doesn't I forget what it was that he said in this. I'm taking this from a speech that he gave that I think it was, or no, it was Ted Kennedy. Sorry, Ted Kennedy.
One of the Kennedys.
One of the good ones. One of the ones that haven't had their, one of their, that's
a band joke.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Dead Kennedys are a great band.
Anyway, keep going.
I didn't even think of that. But I'm taking this from a talk that he gave at the Holt Center that my sister went to, and she was telling me about. But we're not capitalist. We take the trappings of capitalism in order to have a much more oligarchic system. It's not an oligarchy yet, but it's somewhere in between what capitalism actually is and an oligarchy. I think that the Soviet Russia was somewhere in between socialism and oligarchy.
Yeah.
So oligarchy is right up at the top of that horseshoe. I think yeah, that's, I mean, it's two sides of the same coin, but
and
it's never going to be a pure version of either one of those things.
Well, and what I look at when I compare this to the modern day politics, right, to kind of tie it back to this Trump versus whichever Democratic candidate comes up, probably Kamala Harris situation. I mean, when I look at,
for sure.
But it's not for sure until the Democratic National Convention votes.
For sure.
But it's 99% likely. Anyway, when I look at people saying, well, Trump is a fascist, I can see based on his rhetoric why people say that. I do disagree that he really
Trump
is.
Desires to be a fascist.
I don't want to get into this because we've gotten into that. I'm trying to make a point here that I see similar trappings on the left where when you look at, not of fascism, but of the opposite, right? If we say that the right side...
Socialism.
Right, of socialism, where we look at the right as saying both sides are an us versus them conflict, essentially. The difference is who is the us and who is the them. And fascism tends to go more towards a ethnic us versus them, or a social class us versus them. And I'm not going to deny that there's some of that on the right. I'm not denying that.
Republicans campaigning on immigrant crime, which is a non-existent issue.
And I'm not denying that. I'm not going to deny that. But when I look at the left, it becomes a huge rich versus poor, or worker versus company owner. And that is a huge thing that I see on the left. The difference is
that one actually exists. You do have record profits while also companies are laying people off.
I'm not going to deny that. I'm not. And I'm not trying to say that that's not existent.
Because you have rising prices when the price of the necessary capital and input to produce those products are not rising at the same level, and wages aren't being increased.
The problem
you're right that it's spun in different ways, but one of these things is happening. One of these things is not happening, and
whether
we have
it's happening
data
or not.
show.
Whether it's happening or not is not relevant to what I'm trying to get at, because I'm not trying to get at what's happening and what isn't. I'm trying to get at the rhetoric behind how we're looking at it.
Sure.
Because Trump has all this rhetoric, but then he has his actions, and they're two very different things. The left has all their rhetoric, and then they have their actions and desires, and they're usually pretty close to the same. And that is where I think the problem lies, is we have the right who talks a big game, but doesn't really deliver on a lot of it. And then we have the left who talks a big game and then does try to deliver on a lot of it. And I don't necessarily see a problem with regulation on some of these things to make it more fair. I mean, that's how we've done it in the past, and that's how we fixed the Industrial Revolution's problems, is through regulation to make the economy more fair towards not just the workers, but also the company owners and for small business owners and things like that. I think that's great.
Also, so that we don't have cigarette butts and animal like rat parts in our canned meat.
I'm totally fine with that.
You know, processed food and stuff.
The problem becomes when you look at rhetoric like "eat the rich," which is very big on the left right now. I just saw a march in Pittsburgh where they were chanting that.
I've said it.
When that becomes the mainstream idea of a political party, and that party takes control and is actively trying to make those policies happen, it never has ended well. Ever.
I think so. I know that you know, I go on a lot about, like, you know, Trump said this, and you're like, okay, but did he mean that? And I'm like, yeah. First of all, I don't think anyone actually wants to eat the rich.
I know it's a metaphor for bring them down. I know it's a metaphor for bring them down.
But I think it's also just a more socially acceptable way of saying fuck the rich. Now, I don't think anyone actually wants to fuck the rich.
I don't know. But that is I think one of the that's one of those stereotypical things.
Gold diggers are a thing. Yeah, you're right. No. but that's not why they're chanting that. Right. It's not like it's
to hell with the rich, bring them down, get down with the rich, give the power to us kind of a thing.
Whereas, you know, you see the chants on the right, this is another thing. I'm not necessarily afraid of Trump. I'm afraid of the people that actually know what the hell they're doing, that are supporting Trump, who will certainly be able to manipulate him into
I'm the same way,
benefiting their less than kosher, you know, machinations.
But that's how I feel about Bernie Sanders and AOC, because I don't think either one of them are necessarily bad people, but I think that just like I don't have problems necessarily with Trump's policies. I have problems with what some of those policies might lead to. I don't have problems necessarily with AOC or Sanders' policies. I have problems with what those might lead to, because the thing is, capitalism. Well, hold on. Capitalism has historically been significantly easier to get out of or to adjust from and to regulate than socialism has. You dig yourself into a pit with capitalism, you can typically dig yourself out. Almost every time people have dug themselves into a pit with socialism, a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times they have to shoot their way out. That's what's happening in Venezuela right now. That's what's happened. That's what happened and is still kind of happening with Putin in Russia.
I agree. But that's not actually socialism. When you dig yourself into a pit with socialism, it's because you've abandoned socialism and you've still called it socialism, but really it's something else.
And I agree with that. But the problem is socialism has almost always led to that in most situations. And when in the times when it hasn't, it's because they've decided, whoa, that's going too much. Let's bring it back.
Yeah. So I think we haven't had enough experience to be able to see the outcome of these experiments. Sweden hasn't been, you know, this socialist country that it's been for a very long time. And so we still need to see the outcome of it. Now, what I will say is so far, it looks like it's going pretty good for them. You know,
they also don't have to cover a lot of the bills that the United States covers because of NATO and just the fact that the United States is the world police.
Sure. The United States is also much more of an aggressor than these other countries. So yeah, we're going to pay more because we're the we're the ones going in being like, you know, not in my yard. And it's like, that's not even your yard. That's in the next town over. calm
Well,
down.
it's also sometimes like not in my friend's neighbor's yard.
Right, but I mean that's the whole point of NATO.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that the country causing the conflict, or at least adding fuel to the fire, yeah, we should be supplying more of the money. But to be fair, Biden has increased I think all but two member countries of NATO's portion contribution past what even Trump had planned to do.
And I'm
So he's actually done
going
a
to say
great job there.
I think that is great. I will say that is something that Trump started, kind of got the ball rolling on, and I am glad that
but he didn't
Biden
deliver.
continued it. Well, he didn't have time
Yeah.
to. We had a pandemic that shut everything down before he had the ability to close that. Now,
Well,
I'm not
and Biden also had the Ukraine war that I think boosted support for
right.
other NATO countries, particularly in the EU.
I agree. And so I'm trying to give credit here to both, saying, hey, this was something that needed to happen. I'm glad it did. I want to bring it back. We've gotten on a whole lot of different tangents. I want to talk.
And my back really hurts.
I know. So I just want to have a quick little thing on who do you think is more likely to win the election the way things currently stand, Trump or Harris? Who do you think? I think you. Well, that's my next question: is who do you think is better? And I know who you think is better, but who do you think is more likely to win the elections at this point?
I think Harris will sweep the election. I think that voter turnout will probably be I think it'll be historic on both sides. But I think Harris will win the popular vote and the electoral college vote. And I think it's because she's still not great at campaigning. That's kind of her strength, is she's not she just feels very wooden, I think. Not necessarily in the same way as Hillary, but people don't have their own preconceived opinion of her the way that they did Hillary. And I think the fact that she is biracial will cause a lot of historically disenfranchised communities to turn out to vote for her, especially after, and I don't want to go off on a tangent, but especially after the interview with Trump at the National Association of Black Journalists. Yep. I can see how that might help him with people who were gonna vote for him probably anyways. But I think in terms of communities of color, it was the nail in the coffin that they needed if they were still on the fence. And I think that they will turn out in droves. I think that the Republican Party is going to really scramble to do as much as they can to limit people's access to voting, particularly in southern states that are somewhat contentious. But I think either way, Harris is going to run away with it.
I vehemently disagree with that. I think this election change. And it's not just because I don't like her, because again, I don't like Trump either. My students just asked me the other day, because I said, hey, we're going to cover the election. Who are you going to vote for? Is what they asked me. And I said, I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I don't like any of them. I still am confused on what I'm going to do. And I think that is the general feeling of most moderates. I think a lot of the complaints and problems.
I don't think so. I think people who are right leaning and call themselves moderates may feel that way, but I don't get that sense for left leaning moderates. And I think most people who call themselves moderates, in my experience, are a little bit more left leaning than they are right leaning.
So the reason I think this, I don't think they have earned themselves, the Democrats have earned themselves any new voters by nominating Harris. And if they do, I think it's a negligible amount. Because when I look at the complaints that I was seeing people have against Biden, I'm seeing a lot of people make those same complaints against Kamala Harris. The whole idea of it's really hard when she talks because she talks in circles. She doesn't say a lot of things. And I'm not going to say Trump doesn't do these. I don't want to, I'm not going to bring that up. But we're looking just at people looking at her as an alternative to Trump.
She's bad at campaigning. She's
bad at
somewhat,
campaigning. And the
I
problem
don't want to
is,
say unlikable, but it's just like,
no, she's very unlikable in a lot. Yeah. And
I think she seems like a nice person, but it's like, you know,
but on top of that,
weird friend is taking the stage.
Yeah, but on top of that, she's also got this really hard record in her past that she's got to work past. And it's not just of prosecuting minor crimes like marijuana possession and use. It's also like sending a guy to death row and then refusing to release DNA evidence that would have vindicated him until a court order made her do it, like weeks or months before he was set to die.
Was that first of all, I don't think anyone has been executed in California since like the 60s. And that may have been a factor. Like death row is like, you know, quote unquote death row, essentially. For one thing, it's incredibly hard to get the medication needed and somebody to administer the medication because all doctors abide by the Hippocratic Oath, which states, actually it doesn't even state, but the sense of it is first do no harm. That phrase, fun fact, appears nowhere in any version of the Hippocratic Oath. But it's that general consensus is like by administering a drug in order to kill somebody, you're violating the Hippocratic Oath. So we don't actually have that many death row completions.
Yeah, so they haven't executed, I just Googled it, they haven't executed a prisoner since 2006 in California. They do still have the death penalty.
Okay, that's much
and there
more
are currently 650 people as of January 2024 who are on death row.
Yeah, and I think that number is just going to get larger because I think the only place that we can get that medication is India, and they can't verify its like purity. Yeah. Regardless, also I question whether or not it was that the court order forced her, or if that's just the protocol, and she didn't go against what the protocol was. Like I feel like her hands were tied a little bit from the very limited amount of knowledge that I have.
I'm looking it up right now, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, including the Sacramento Bee, Newsweek, ABC News, and the Marshall Project, that are all saying she has, at best, a complex record. At best, she did not pursue all of the evidence that was referenced because of whatever reason, and at worst, actively blocked DNA evidence.
Yeah, I mean, as a prosecutor, you're not going to pursue evidence that doesn't certainly help your case. That's what the defense does. That's just kind of the tactic. I'm not defending her. I'm just saying I don't think that narrative is exactly an accurate representation.
And the reason I bring it up is
but
not
I agree
to
that
say
it's complicated. She has a complicated record.
Well, and the reason I bring it up is not necessarily to speak on her because, hey, she may have been earlier in her career. I don't know what it was like. I wasn't there in her office. But what I do bring it up for is she's got a very complicated record that she's got to muddle through and has to deal with. You know, Trump, people have already reconciled his record if they're going to vote for him. People are already willing to deal with it.
That's the concerning part, though. First of all, it's like I've been seeing things about like the it's so ironic that the Back the Blue crowd is championing
going for a felon.
A felon.
And I've seen this too.
Felon on multiple counts. And the ACAB crowd is electing like a pretty litigious prosecutor.
Yeah, it's pretty funny how those tables have turned.
But anyway, I think the discretions associated with those labels though are very imbalanced.
Sure.
You know, a felon who is still in court.
A lot of his cases are getting dismissed though. He just had a whole bunch of them dismissed in Florida.
First of all, the Eileen Cannon documents trial certainly is going to be appealed in another district, or at least with another judge. And that really was a sham. Eileen Cannon was totally
Let's
had
not get
decided
too bogged
the
down here.
Anyway, the other case, oh God, what was the other case? Was that the Georgia
I don't
one?
know. I don't remember. What I mean is, like, people
That's
have
also going to be appealed. So either way, it could change. I think it's going to change in the direction of Trump's going to be a felon on more accounts than he currently is.
I don't necessarily see that as a. What I mean to say. Let me restart that. I think that's a possibility for sure.
Okay, I thought you were going to say I don't see that as a bad thing. I'm like,
no, and that's why I restarted, because I was like, wait, no, that's not what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah.
What I want to say though is I think that the Democratic Party had an opportunity to win over a ton of votes by electing someone or nominating someone who is very much a likable person who still fits these profiles of young minorities, kind of a thing. They have all these different candidate or people within their party that they could have done, and
Not
then they
this
go
late
to
in the
Kamala
game,
Harris. Oh yeah, they do. They could nominate
No.
anybody they want. Because I mean, look, that's how you pull a vice president, you know?
Because you have to have the name recognition. Because
I agree.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, but here's what would happen if they nominated somebody who was, diverse, who was younger, who, even was as, if not more qualified than Kamala Harris, is you'd have other chuckleheads within the Democratic Party who have no ability to actually win the general election, who would be taking up the space while we're trying to figure out who the hell this new person is. We know who Kamala Harris is, and that's the only pivot that the Democratic Party could have taken. And I think they've done a great job with it.
I think that's why they did it. And on
I
top
agree.
of that, you also have the fact that the only way that they could have kept all of Biden's campaign funding was if she took over, because she was already on that ticket.
Right.
I understand why they're choosing her, but I don't think it gathers them nearly as much clout or votes or progress as a lot of Democrats like to think it does. Because a lot of Republicans are just going to see her as woman Biden, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you like Biden, you're going to like Harris. I don't see that necessarily as an inherent problem. But a lot of people who already... I mean, there's...
People aren't going to see that. You're correct.
Exactly. That's how she's going to be marketed.
They'll view her in that
exactly
way,
as an extension of Biden, because she was his vice president. But
she was there to balance out the ticket. That's what people need to realize.
Exactly. So I think we're looking at a situation where the Democrats had to choose between probably a lesser known person who would have excited everybody, but then you have to fight name recognition and funding, or someone who nobody really likes but has the name recognition and funding. And that's a terrible situation, and I think that's why it's not helping them at all.
I wouldn't say that people don't like Kamala Harris. I think her biggest problem is that we don't know that much about her. Now, that may be a tactic that they try to use as an advantage, but I think what shifting the campaign and the nomination to Kamala Harris did was shore up all of the Democrats which is a significant, maybe not in terms of numbers, significant, I'm not going to say majority, but portion, but extremely vocal portion of potential, Democratic voters. What it did was it shored up a lot of those people. And now, in order to get moderates or even maybe some, very close to center Republicans, it's going to depend on the VP pick. And she's going to pick a VP
I agree with that,
who is going to appeal to the more conservative people who may call themselves conservative but absolutely hate Trump. Honestly, I mean, you're going to try to pick somebody who would appeal to you is what they're going to attempt to do.
I think you're right, and I hope that's the case for the sake of if they want to win, for the sake of a closer election. And that's why I think, as things stand right now, I don't think anything has changed. A lot really is going to depend on who she chooses for a vice president.
Yeah.
Because
I don't think J.D. Vance helped Trump's case for
I think it did a lot. I think it did a lot because young Republicans love hillbilly elegy.
Yeah, that's true.
I think J.D.
He's
Vance was the
charismatic.
perfect pick for
Well,
Donald
he's
Trump's
not even
vice president.
charismatic, but he's just not as he's not Trump is more charismatic than JD Vance, but JD Vance is a smoother sip.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense.
He comes off as more level-headed. Whether he is or not, I don't know enough about him to say, but that's how he comes off. And when you've got someone who's a little bit more of a loose cannon like Trump, he's that perfect balance. I think J.D. Vance was the perfect pick for Trump, and they've got to come up with an equally perfect. I'm not going to say he's the perfect pick for vice president. He's the perfect pick for Trump.
I think it was a great pick to bolster the people that were already going to vote for him. I think that if they want to pull anyone towards the Trump campaign, that's the thing. I've always said it was Biden's race to lose, because the people that were going to vote for Trump or already have voted for Trump, they're going to vote for Trump no matter what happens, no matter what the rhetoric is, no matter how many charges he gets, no matter who his opponent is, they're going to vote for Trump.
But you see people who say vote blue no matter who are going to do the exact same thing for the left.
I mean, you do see that, but I don't. I think especially when Biden was still the nominee, you saw, or at least I did, and I think maybe that's because I live in a more liberal area of the country than you do. I saw tons of division within, the registered Democrats.
See, and
People
I think
were
that's
not
why.
Happy.
And I think that's why losing Biden has been a positive thing. And I know your back's hurting, so let's wrap this up and we can go. But I think that's why Kamala Harris is making a more energized and united Democratic Party, but I don't think she's winning non-Democratic votes.
I would agree with that. And that going back to I think that's where her vice presidential
I think so too.
Is going to come in.
I'll be interested to see what happens at the Democratic National Convention. Why don't you give us a closeout? I'll give us our fun fact, and then we'll roll the credits.
All right. Well, as always, thank you to Halcyon Club. Still no news on that new album, but I really like the songs that I've heard from it so far, and we'll keep you updated. They, of course, did our intro and outro music. It's the song "This Life Is Tough But Fair" from their EP, Headset Emotions, which you can find on Spotify. Along with us, and follow us on social media, and give us some likes and subscribes.
So your fun fact is relevant to the Olympics. You're right. My fun fact for you is relevant to the Olympics in that you heard that they had to clean out the River Seine because there was so much sewage in it. So in 1858, so much sewage had been poured into the River Thames in London that this is now that we know this period as the Great Stink, because the stench from the river was so bad that they had to soak their curtains in lime chloride, and they had to pour like 250 tons or some exorbitant amount of lime into the water every day just to make it passable.
Just to make it like alkaline, so it killed everything. I think around that same time, there was another event called the Great Smog, which was just like a week-long period of just super, super thick, dense, just like coal, dust or smoke and smog and stuff from like all the coal fires, and people would just walk into the Thames.
Yeah.
And then drown because it was so toxic and they couldn't find the end of it. So like I want to say a couple hundred people died from the falling into the Thames because of the thick, like not because of the lack of visibility. And then how just absolutely disgusting the Thames was and still kind of is.
Yeah, it's not a clean looking river.
It's gross. And even after they cleaned the Seine, it's still gross.
Yeah, even after they cleaned it, it did not pass the test for them to hold events in it.
Well, they did. They started the triathlon today.
Yeah.
And
maybe it passed at the last minute, but I know that when the Olympics started.